welcome to Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates. It's a beautiful day. I am investigative reporter Sierra Cummings, joined with investigative reporter Anastassia Olmos. Welcome. Hi.
Hello. It is a beautiful day.
Yeah, we are so vibrant about really kind of a little bit of a dark story here. I had no clue what premise liability was and how it's a part of the grander conversation around tort reform, but now you're like my little mini expert. So talk to me about how you found out about this story and explain to us what premise liability is in simple terms.
Sierra, same. When I actually frequently talk with the Insurance Information Institute just to see what's going on, and they said, hey, we're going to start this campaign in Atlanta, really greater Georgia. We're going to put some billboards, up on the interstates, letting people know that, there's too much litigation going on in the state of Georgia, tort reform, this and that. And I'm like, what? Okay. So after doing some digging, I could go on and on and on. If you, visit the article, this issue is so complex. It not only affects you and me every day in our rent prices and our cost of food in the stores that we have in our neighborhoods, but it affects businesses and how much they're paying for insurance, their risks, for possible lawsuits, being sued based on the security that they have. And as you'll see in this story, the amount of money that they have to put into security to keep their premises, their land that they own safe. And then there's the effect on insurance companies who are covering these lawsuits. So, liability is an insurance term. Yeah. So when something happens on your property, you call your insurance company and you say, hey, I need that coverage to kick in. And then that's when they step in. And often, if there's a lawsuit, they will either decide to settle, take it to court. And that's when these nuclear verdicts come into play. Tens of millions of dollars. It is just a trickle effect all the way down to possibly, businesses not only shutting down in certain areas based on crime, but leaving the state altogether. So this piece really discusses a lot of different angles. When school's out, you'll find kids playing inside the villages at East Lake Apartments in Atlanta.
But you'll see there's gates there.
Laurel Hart helps oversee affordable housing complexes like this one for Columbia Residential.
A lot of cameras here.
Trying to keep thousands of families safe in some of the highest crime areas.
We have over 100 cameras here at East Lake, and we pay $18,000 a month just for cameras.
But Hart says a Georgia law holding them accountable for third-party crimes has their insurance company facing one potential lawsuit after another.
Our insurance has gone up, not 100%, not 200%, probably like 600%.
And she worries they may not be able to continue their work in these communities.
A lot of our properties, we no longer have any kind of cash flow due to cost of security.
It's known as Georgia's premises liability law. It essentially holds a property owner responsible for a visitor's injuries if they failed to keep the property safe. And court rulings have furthered the owner's responsibilities to include not only crimes that happen on the property, but around it too.
Our standard is higher than the police right now because we're expected to stop crime.
When someone threatens to sue for injuries, Hart says their insurance company either has to settle at a minimum of $600,000 with fees or face the possibility of what the insurance world calls nuclear verdicts of millions of dollars.
And everybody can just see it on the billboards. There's attorneys holding up big wads of cash saying, I won 17 million, I won 12 million, I won 11 million.
How about 43 million? That's what a Southeast Atlanta CVS had to pay this past summer after a man was shot and injured selling an iPad in their parking lot. The court found them liable in part because there had been robberies in the past and they removed security guards.
As one of our monitoring officers over there. It's 24 hours security, and we usually have 3 at a time.
The costs, experts say, are ultimately passed on to the consumer.
Those higher premiums, when the coverage is available, get passed on to the people who live in the apartments. The everyday person pays more in rent, more in food.
Agents say some insurance companies are no longer covering businesses like grocery stores or gas stations, and the state is already seeing stores closing down due to the cost of crime.
If you're in the city of Atlanta, by Georgia State, Racetrack no longer has a store there. Quick Trip closed a store there.
Racetrack by GSU closed in February after a series of deadly shootings between their property and the student apartments across the street. Both are now facing trial in a premises liability lawsuit. But personal injury attorneys argue the law holds businesses accountable. Hypothetically speaking, Matthew Stoddard says,
3 people reported to us they've been sexually assaulted in their units. 2 kids have been shot in our units. Well, when that happens, you need to behave differently. And that ain't what they're doing.
At some of our properties, like our Mechanicsville property, we spend close to $1 million on security each year in addition to insurance.
As costs continue to climb, Columbia Residential says raising rent isn't an option.
The amount that we're paying now per unit is almost making it impossible to maintain an affordable housing property in the state of Georgia.
So, first off, great job, incredible story.
Thank
You
you.
do such a good job at really explaining the burden and how it trickles down to just the everyday person like you and me. One of my best friends who used to work here and is now at our sister station, he called me when it aired in the 7 o'clock show on Monday and said, wow, she did such a great job really explaining that. And so
Wow.
let's just double down here. When you're watching this property management saying, hey, we're trying to be the change we wish to see in the city of Atlanta. We want to give people affordable housing. But we're in between this rock and a hard place because we are tasked, or at least their opinion is that they're tasked with the same level of responsibility, if not more, compared to police.
Yeah. You know, in particular, that neighborhood in East Atlanta, if you do research, you know, there's some links in the article. If you go click, it was once known as the Little Vietnam for just the amount of crime. We linked to a study there that looked at the amount of deaths that were happening in a week. And it was just such a horrible place that, you know, that people wanted to come into the community and revitalize it. And that's what they've done over the decades, is come in and try to bring more opportunities. They've got the YMCA there. They've got great schools there. They've got the golf course. And this housing complex actually partners with a lot of these organizations to try to give people in the community resources. And something like that is what changes people's lives. And if, you know, you can't come in because you can't afford $18,000 a month for cameras, then really, how can you create change? In addition to, this does trickle down to what's called food deserts or pharmacy deserts, where businesses that provide, you know, affordable food that's healthy for families, as well as pharmacies like CVS that come in and bring medicine for families, if they can't take on the responsibility of not only security, but the risk of being sued, then they're not going to build in these neighborhoods. So when you go to certain areas, not only in Atlanta, but in different areas of Georgia, and you can't find a Publix or you can't find a pharmacy, it's sometimes because of laws like this.
Now, I mean, you bring the point up that, like, what if they choose not to build? But what if they still continue to build in those areas, whether it is, you know, a grocery store or an apartment complex? Then that cost will be shifted onto the buyer, wouldn't you say? Like, if they have to pay for increased insurance rates, then it does trickle down to us. We might have to pay more for that affordable housing that now becomes unaffordable, or you might have to pay more for those items in the grocery store, and it just really feels like, man, I can't afford to live in this city or this neighborhood.
Great point. But people don't really notice it because it's over time, right? It's a couple cents here, it's a couple cents there, but the Insurance Information Institute estimates that over the span of a year, we're paying $1,400 in these little tiny fees here and there to cover businesses. And this is every person in the state of Georgia. It's you know, likely different in other places that, you know, the cost of food is higher, so we don't feel it as much, but it's definitely out there.
Yeah, and you feel it when that bill comes. One of our colleagues, Abby Kasouris, has talked a little bit about tort reform here, and one of the ways that I came to understand it was through my car insurance rate. You know, when you're somebody like me, not to toot my own horn, but if you have a really good driving record, and then just like over time, you're like, wait, why is my insurance rate changing? It's when you start to notice all of this when that bill shows up. And then Abby did several stories about like how the rates are changing, particularly in places like Georgia and Metro Atlanta, because of some of these lawsuits over time. The legislative session, we're on just day 3, so we're in that first week. What are you hearing around this? I feel like last legislative session, tort reform was a big deal, but it's one of those things that they
gotta
don't walk
get
away
something
from. It's like
passed.
it's ongoing, right? What are you hearing so far?
So last year, they passed what they call the Data Analysis for Tort Reform Act. And what it essentially does is look at the entire insurance industry, look at their lawsuits and how much it's cost, where they're being sued, and potentially the cost that goes down to the consumer. So they did that study. That came out in November. We have a link in our article. And what they found is that these lawsuits are up. They are costing more and more. I mean, outrageous prices for damages. And then they also found that they're going for limits. So they're going for however much your insurance company, has on that policy, they're going for all of it. Not only that, but they found that majority of these lawsuits are auto liability, which we know, bodily injury. However, those paying the most out, tens of millions of dollars, are businesses and commercial companies, like CVS, $43 million. There's also another case here in Jonesboro that just recently happened where a mobile home park had to pay $31 million for a man that was on their property. He had been asked to leave several times over the span of more than a year, but he was staying with his brother. He was borrowing a car from a neighbor. Someone came onto the property and attempted to steal the car. He came out. He had a firearm. The other person had a firearm as well. That man that was on the property, not stealing the car, but came out to defend the car, he was shot and killed. His daughter sued and got $31 million, in part because crime has happened near this mobile home park prior to this, around it, in it, and they say that the owner had a duty to make sure that they knew who was on their property and that they had these different firearms.
Wow.
However, that gets into another issue because eviction moratorium, it was hard for landlords to make people get off their property, right? You cannot go in and physically pick somebody up and say, get out of here, unless you call the police, but they could come back. And so that was an issue in this case as well, is they've asked this person to leave. How do you control, somebody like that for a year? If you're calling police, you're calling police.
Yeah.
And so there in that story, you hear her say they're asked to do more than the police are asked to do.
Wow.
And then, the other side, which we didn't mention in the video, but is in depth in the article, the other side here is that this law also protects victims of human trafficking. So a hotel is a business, and when you have somebody coming and renting rooms and running possibly underage women or men through their rooms for human trafficking, they say that this law holds the hotel accountable for who they rent a room to, and basically they have a duty to protect the people that are not only guests but the victims who are being trafficked. And this is the exact law that the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association says allows them to protect victims in court.
Wow. And just raising that kind of perspective, I do think you have a wealth of opportunity to continue this project and essentially put out a series on it, because it's so massive and the details are minute, but they all matter and they're all really intersected. It's sometimes really hard for a viewer, our average viewer, to maybe feel empathetic toward a massive business, a massive corporation, because you're like, well,
CVS.
Right, you're like, well, they make
They've
these
got stores
millions and
everywhere.
billions, like, I can't worry about them. But with the way that you're able to weave all of this together, in the end, it does come back down to ultimately affect our pockets. And so there's so much more to do here. I mean, what's been the reaction so far from attorneys? You had several in this story, but I'm sure it's one of those things that attorneys are interested to see what happens in the legislative session.
They do predict that this is the year that there will be some sort of change.
Got it.
Business in Georgia is really, really important, especially since the pandemic.
Yeah.
Georgia's done really well, tax incentives here. However, a law like this driving businesses away. So it's priority this year. We haven't seen any actual concrete bills yet. However, I've spoken with a lobbyist. He's actually quoted in the article as well, but he says he's put together an entire team of people that are going to be trying to get this, passed, something on this passed. And I've even spoken with, an attorney who says, yes, something is going to pass. I just don't know what.
Wow.
So it should be interesting to see if this is not only prioritized, but if it's, passed. And if so, will it be similar to Florida, where you're limiting how much they can get, or if you're spelling out what kind of security that they need to have? Is gates enough? Is lighting enough? Are cameras enough? There's a lot of different avenues, so we'll definitely stay on this.
Yeah, it's something that we'll definitely be watching. Kind of a cliffhanger here. We know the legislative session is 3 or so months, so it's a while to see what shakes and what gets prioritized, but this seems to be one of those conversations on the tip of people's tongues. You did an excellent job. If people want to reach out to you, where do they find you?
So you can go to our website. We have a form on there where you can email all of us any sort of investigation that you feel needs our attention. Go ahead and send us an email. You can also find our bios on there at atlantanewsfirst.com.
Thanks so much for joining us on Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates. Be sure to watch, listen, stream, download wherever you get your podcasts. We're everywhere. YouTube, online,
Spotify,
iHeartRadio,
Apple Music.
everywhere. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys.